This is SpaceTime Series 29, Episode 22, for broadcast on the 20th of February 2026. Coming up on SpaceTime, could the first black holes in the universe have formed within seconds of the Big Bang? A possible origin for Saturn's iconic rings. And NASA getting ready for another Artemis 2 manned moon launch attempt. All that and more coming up on SpaceTime.
Welcome to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary.
A new study claims that some of the universe's most exotic stuff, things like cannibal stars, black holes and boson stars, could have formed within the first seconds of the birth of the cosmos in the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. The findings, reported in the journal Physical Review D, suggest that before the first atoms came together, less than a second after the Big Bang, subatomic particles might have condensed to form what they call halos of matter. These halos might then have collapsed, creating the first black holes, objects called boson stars, and even more exotic objects called cannibal stars. The study's authors from the International School of Advanced Studies base their work on a hypothesis proposed in some cosmological models, namely that the earliest phases of the universe's existence after the Big Bang saw what was a brief early matter-dominated era. So the authors investigated how particles might have interacted with each other during this period. They discovered that such interactions could give rise to a surprising variety of extremely exotic cosmic objects, some of which we know and a lot which we don't. The study suggests that even during the very first instances of the Big Bang, the universe could have already been a stage for rich and complex physical phenomena. Recent advances in cosmology have made it possible to reconstruct in detail the history of the universe, from its rapid initial expansion, known as inflation, to primordial nucleosynthesis, the formation of the first atomic nuclei heavier than hydrogen, which occurred between 10 seconds and 20 minutes after the Big Bang. The immediate period, however, remains largely unexplored. An intriguing possibility during this interval was that matter temporarily dominated the universe. Now, in this scenario, matter halos can naturally be formed. And if these particles could interact with one another, then the interactions could lead to a gravithermal collapse, resulting in compact objects such as black holes and other exotic cosmic structures. Among these compact objects, the authors suggest that cannibal stars could have been formed. Now, a cannibal star is similar to a traditional star, except that its particles self-annihilate instead of causing the nuclear fusion that powers normal stars. At the same time, the authors also suggest so-called boson stars may have formed. These involve the quantum nature of particles supporting the star itself. Now, these stars may all have populated the newborn universe for only a few seconds before collapsing further to form primordial black holes. Now, alternatively, the primordial black holes could have formed directly from the collapse of the matter halos. Now, according to the study, the halos formed during an early matter-dominated era had relatively small masses, smaller than around 10 to the power of 28 grams, and, following gravithermal collapse, could have generated even smaller primordial black holes. Now, using a simplified theoretical model, the authors showed that in some cases, primordial black holes might have overproduced, violating observational constraints. In others, asteroid-sized primordial black holes could have formed, potentially accounting for all the dark matter in the universe today. Finally, some primordial black holes might have evaporated really quickly, disappearing before primordial nucleosynthesis could have taken place, that is, before the formation of light atoms such as hydrogen and helium. The authors say it'd be interesting to explore the formation of cannibal stars and boson stars in the present-day universe through the collapse of self-interacting dark matter halos. And more speculative, studying star formation and accretion in simple particle models could provide new insights into the complex astrophysical processes that shape our universe today. This is SpaceTime. Still to come, a possible origin for Saturn's iconic rings, and getting ready for another Artemis 2 manned moon launch attempt. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. A new study suggests that Saturn's largest moon, Titan, could have formed from a collision between two older moons, and this event may also have been linked to the formation of Saturn's iconic rings. The 13-year mission of NASA's Cassini spacecraft and its European Space Agency Huygens lander expanded science's understanding of the Saturnian system and some of its many moons, including Titan, where Huygens landed. Among those discoveries was the young age of Saturn's spectacular ring system and the detection of Titan's rapidly shifting orbit. Now, a new study reported in the Planetary Science Journal and on the pre-press physics website archive.org proposes a new explanation, linking the formation of the Saturnian moons and rings, centering on the possibility that Titan is the product of a moon merger. Near the end of its mission, Cassini measured Saturn's internal mass distribution, which governs the planet's slow spin axis wobble or precession. For decades, scientists thought Saturn's precessional period matched that of Neptune, enabling the two planets' gravitational interactions to gradually tilt Saturn, which lets us clearly see its rings. Later, as Jupiter and Saturn migrated out to their current orbital positions, their gravitational perturbations caused Neptune to be flung out of its original orbit and moved beyond Uranus into its current outer solar system position. Cassini's final trajectory showed Saturn's mass is slightly more concentrated at its centre than what was expected. But that changes its precession rate, so it no longer matches that of Neptune. Now, to explain this, scientists propose that Saturn once had an extra moon, which was ejected after a close encounter with Titan and eventually broke up, forming Saturn's spectacular ring system. The study, led by the SETI Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, used computer simulations to determine if an extra moon could get close enough to Saturn to form the rings. But the models showed the most likely outcome was a collision of this extra moon with Titan. Now, Saturn's small, misshapen, constantly tumbling moon, Hyperion, has its orbit locked with that of Titan. The study's lead author, Matcha Cook from the SETI Institute, says Hyperion, the smallest among Saturn's major moons, provided the most important clue about the history of the system. Cook says that in computer simulations, where the extra moon became unstable, Hyperion was often lost, surviving only in rare cases. Cook and colleagues recognise that the Titan-Hyperion lock is relatively young, only a few 100 million years old. And this dates to around the same period as when the extra moon would have disappeared. Perhaps Hyperion didn't survive this upheaval, but instead resulted from it. See, if the extra moon merged with Titan, then it would likely have produced fragments near Titan's orbit, and that's exactly where Hyperion would have formed. And this provided the most important clue. The new model suggests that Titan formed from a merger between two earlier moons, a sort of proto-Titan, nearly as large as Titan itself today, and a smaller proton-Hyperion. Now, this merger could well explain Titan's few impact craters, which would have been erased during the process. And Titan's eccentric orbit, which is now quickly becoming rounder, suggests a recent disturbance from a possible proto-Hyperion. Before merging, Proto-Titan probably resembled Jupiter's Callisto, a cratered surface and lacking any atmosphere. The authors also found that before its disappearance, Proto-Hyperion tilted the orbit of Saturn's distant moon Lapidus, solving another long-standing mystery. Now, if the Titan we know today was formed through a merger, where did the rings of Saturn come from? Well, earlier studies had suggested the rings were debris from collisions between medium-sized moons closer into Saturn. That idea was later supported by simulations from the University of Edinburgh and NASA's Ames Research Centre. They showed that most debris would reassemble into moons, but a fraction of debris would have been scattered inwards, forming Saturn's rings. For years, it was thought that this inner-moon collision was triggered by the Sun, but the new research finds that it was a further result from the Titan merger. See, Titan's eccentric orbit would have destabilised the inner moons, a situation known as orbital resonance, where orbits align and gravitational influences increase. Titan's expanding orbit sometimes creates these ratios, and the results for affected smaller moons would be catastrophic. Their orbits would elongate, sending them towards collisions with their neighbours. While the timing of the second cataclysm is unclear, it must have occurred after Titan's merger, which is consistent with the ring's estimated age of around 100 million years. This report from NASA TV.
Titan is surrounded by a partially transparent brown haze. Dark regions along Titan's equator are mostly dune fields. Brighter regions are highlands a few hundred meters high. Images taken from the Huygens probe show Titan's surface in more detail. The probe had spectrometers that measured small variations in the color of Titan's surface. Most of Titan's surface is brown. North of the landing site, a pair of parallel dark dunes stretch east-west. A large highland of triangular shape lies to the northwest. Dark canyons, a complicated network of channels where rivers of methane flowed at some time in the past. To the east of the landing site is a system of bright ridges, standing out above the dark, dry lake bed. The ridges have intricate structures that tell stories about their past. The Huygens probe descended toward one of these ridges. Some regions were imaged with high resolution just before Huygens landed on Titan, especially the area to the west of the landing site. Most of Titan's surface is covered by dark organics that are produced in the atmosphere and slowly settle down. Bright spots may be exposed patches of water ice. While the probe rotated during the descent, its orientation after landing had the camera looking to the south. The camera saw a field of pebbles that were carried around by a river of methane in the past. Some pebbles are larger than a human hand. The descent imager spectral radiometer illuminated the surface, allowing spectral analysis. The lamp's spotlight stands out brightly since days on Titan are even darker than cloudy days on Earth. Little sunlight reaches Titan's surface due to its thick haze and large distance from the sun.
This is SpaceTime. Still to come, getting ready for another possible launch of NASA's Artemis II manned moon mission. And later in the science report, a new study shows that apes, just like people, have imaginations. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. Well, in the wake of last week's scrubbing of the Artemis II manned moon mission launch following hydrogen leaks discovered during a wet dress rehearsal at the Kennedy Space Center, NASA engineers have now replaced two seals in the tail service mast umbilical area of the mobile launcher, the location where the elevated hydrogen concentrations were detected during tanking. After draining the 98-metre-tall Space Launch System SLS rocket's cryogenic liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen propellants, technicians separated the rocket-to-ground interface plates and inspected the fueling lines before installing the new seals. Now, the same issue had developed during the Space Launch System's countdown for the unmanned Artemis I mission, which went round the Moon and back to Earth in 2022. The removed hardware from Artemis II is now being analysed, and additional testing will be conducted at NASA's Stennis Space Center in order to validate the repairs. NASA expects to reconnect the interfaces to the launch pad in the next few days. Changes planned for the next wet dress rehearsal will see the Orion spacecraft's crew hatch closed prior to the test. A faulty valve in the hatch pressurization system was one of the other issues that came up during the test. That valve was replaced prior to the test and it had to be retorqued, adding additional time to the test. So the launch day closeout crew will not deploy to the pad and the crew access arm will remain extended during the wet test. Also, two planned countdown holds, each gaining an additional 30 minutes, will be added to the pre-launch rundown, providing more troubleshooting time and cleaner engineering data. NASA says none of these adjustments will affect launch day crew operations. Mission managers are now looking at other launch attempts in March, with 5 launch windows available during the month on the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th and 11th. Now, if the mission can't make any of those dates, another launch window opens on April the 1st, with alternatives between April the 3rd and the 6th, and again on April the 30th. Now, this wet dress rehearsal they're all working towards involves loading 2.65 million litres of cryogenically cooled liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen into the rocket and then proceed with mimicking the final stages of the actual countdown, with automated systems taking control of countdown operations, final checks of flight computers, engine bleed systems becoming operational, ground support equipment all running, and the rocket itself transitioning to internal power, with the countdown then proceeding towards a simulated engine start. NASA last sent astronauts to the Moon during the Apollo era back in the 1960s and 70s. The last humans to walk on the Moon were back in 1972 from the Apollo 17 mission. The Artemis program aims to set the stage for returning humans to the Moon and providing a permanent presence on the lunar surface, including a new space station in cislunar orbit called the Lunar Gateway. Eventually, Artemis will send humans on longer missions to Mars and beyond. When it does finally launch, Artemis II will test key systems aboard the Orion spacecraft, including its maneuverability and docking ability, its life support and radiation protection systems, its navigation systems, and its avionics. A number of experiments and the deployment of 5 satellites will also take place during the flight, which itself will travel more than 6,500 kilometres beyond the Moon, making it the furthest humans have ever travelled from Earth. Splashdown will be in the North Pacific Ocean off the California coast. Artemis 2 will be followed by the Artemis 3 mission, which will return humans to the lunar surface, landing near the Moon's south pole. This report from NASA TV.
With Artemis 3 planning to return humans to the Moon for the first time since 1972, NASA and its commercial partners continue to develop the systems needed to land crews safely on the lunar surface. SpaceX will provide and operate a moon lander for NASA's Artemis 3 mission called Starship Human Landing System, or HLS. During Artemis 3, NASA's Space Launch System rocket will launch 4 astronauts aboard the Orion spacecraft for their multi-day journey to lunar orbit. The Starship HLS, powered by 2 variants of SpaceX's Raptor engines, will launch uncrewed on a super heavy booster to lunar orbit to pick up the crew. Once on board the HLS, 2 crew members will head to the surface of the Moon, where they will live and work for about a week, collecting samples and performing science experiments. Once they're done, they'll get back into Starship to the orbiting Orion and return to Earth.
This is SpaceTime. And time now to take another brief look at some of the other stories making news in science this week with the Science Report. A new study has shown that rates of schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders are on the increase among younger people. The findings, reported in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, examined diagnosis rates for psychotic disorders between 1992 and 2023 among more than 12 million people. The authors found that the annual rate of diagnoses increased by 60% over the study period for people aged 14 to 20, but remained stable or even dropped for those aged 21 to 50. They say they could find no clear reason why this was the case, but drug use, socioeconomic stress, and older parental age could potentially be contributing factors. A new study has shown that apes, just like people, have imaginations. The findings, reported in the journal Science, show the capacity to pretend is not uniquely human. In a series of Tea Party experiments, researchers demonstrated for the first time that apes can use their imagination and play pretend, an ability thought to have been uniquely human. Consistently across 3 experiments, a bonobo engaged with cups of imaginary juice and bowls of pretend grapes. The findings suggest that the capacity to understand pretend objects is within the cognitive potential of at least an encultured ape, and likely dates back 6 to 9 million years to our common evolutionary ancestors. By the age of 2, human kids do engage in pretend scenarios like tea parties. And previously young female chimpanzees in the wild have been observed carrying and playing with sticks, holding them just like their mothers would with a young infant. In other words, the chimps were playing dolly. In an experiment undoubtedly inspired by the work of Nikola Tesla, scientists have successfully transmitted electricity through the air using ultrasonic sound waves and laser beams. Finnish researchers from the University of Helsinki and the University of Oulu have been undertaking the work, which could eventually move electricity without the need of physical cables. The latest tests involve high-intensity ultrasonic waves creating an invisible pathway through the air, effectively guiding electrical sparks along a controlled route called an acoustic wire. Other research is focused on leveraging light and radio frequencies that utilize high-powered lasers to transmit electricity to remote receivers, providing critical galvanic isolation for hazardous environments like nuclear power plants and high-voltage power stations. The technology could eventually enable contactless electrical connections and smart interfaces that function entirely without the need of plugs or traditional wiring. In what appears to be a terrible indictment of the Russian education system, a new study claims a fifth of all Russians believe the sun revolves around the Earth. The survey found that some 62% of Russians never or almost never looked for news about scientific achievements. 43% never discuss them, and only 12% can name one contemporary Russian scientist of a world level. The greatest decline in knowledge was observed when it came to disciplines such as chemistry, materials science, mathematics, and engineering technologies. While older Russian generations were more interested in scientific news, it seems younger Russians are more likely to believe in the paranormal. In fact, today 20% of Russians are convinced the sun revolves around the Earth, while back in 2022 that figure was 14%. 16% of Russians believe people lived at the same time as dinosaurs, and among young people aged 18 to 24, that figure reaches 18%. At the same time, 39% believe in sorcerers, and 34% believe in the ability of psychics to predict the future. The skeptic's Tim Mendham says it all indicates a sharp decline in scientific literacy and a rise in the belief of pseudosciences.
1 in 5 Russians believe that geocentric universe, that the Earth is at the centre of the solar system and that the sun moves around it like the old orreries used to be and that sort of stuff. It's not true that the sun revolves around the Earth, but never mind. They're suggesting that it's more common with younger people in Russia. It's that some people believe in dinosaurs living at the same time as people, and it's higher amongst young people than it is amongst older people. 39% believe in sorcerers, 34% believe in the ability of psychics to predict the future. Well, that's probably just as high in other countries as well. This survey actually came through the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. So you just wonder, it might be a case of trying to undermine people's attitudes towards Russians. I don't know what the story is in other countries. Are the Russians less scientific than anyone else? Who knows?
That's the skeptic's Tim Mendham, and this is Space Time. That's the show for now. SpaceTime is available every Monday, Wednesday and Friday through Bytes.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, your favourite podcast download provider, and from SpaceTimeWithStuartGarry.com. SpaceTime's also broadcast through the National Science Foundation on Science Zone Radio and on both iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio. And you can help to support our show by visiting the SpaceTime store for a range of promotional merchandising goodies, or by becoming a SpaceTime patron, which gives you access to triple-episode commercial-free versions of the show, as well as lots of bonus audio content which doesn't go to air, access to our exclusive Facebook group, and other rewards. Just go to SpaceTimeWithStuartGarry.com for full details.
You've been listening to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.